Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Revenue Throughput Podcast. And our guest today is Lindsey Groepper of BLASTmedia. They are a PR firm with a deep specialization in B2B SaaS companies, that is, software companies that work with manufacturers, industrial companies, and so on. That is their specialty. And today we're going to talk about PR. Is that something that's still relevant, especially in the mid-market, especially in B2B? And if it's relevant, how can you, as let's say an owner, a leader in one of those companies, how can you think about getting your arms around PR as a practical matter to use it to leverage growth within your business? So let's welcome Lindsey to our show and let's find out what she has to share with us. Well, welcome, Lindsey, to the Revenue Throughput Podcast.
Thank you. I really appreciate the invite. I'm excited for our conversation.
Yeah, looking forward to it as well. So Lindsey, for our listeners, if you could just tell us a little bit about what you do and who you do it for.
Of course. Thank you for the opportunity. So we are an agency that's pretty easy to define because we do one thing really well for one particular audience. So we execute PR for specifically B2B SaaS companies. So for those listening that might not be familiar with that terminology, it's essentially software companies. So a software company that sells to a business as their primary audience. And that is squarely what we're focused on. We are not a full service marketing agency. We are experts in both PR and specifically for that B2B SaaS vertical.
And for those watching on YouTube, they could see BLASTmedia.com, right? So it's BLASTmedia is the firm. Yep. What I really like and what would intrigue me about having this conversation, Lindsey, is the fact that you are proudly a PR firm. And so I get asked this question a lot. I work mostly in the lower to middle market. So, $2, $20, $30 million companies. Yep. Like, is PR still relevant? Is it something we should strategize for? Or is social media, SEO, is that just another name for the same thing? Is it something else still, and does it still matter? Just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll answer that in two parts. So is it still relevant? I would answer that question with another question, which is your brand perception ever irrelevant? What people feel and see and the trust factor that it comes along with having a presence online, is that ever irrelevant? And the answer is no. That's always relevant, always important. And PR and social media both play into that. It is that experience, that digital experience that a prospect, a partner, an investor experiences when they go online and inevitably search about you. So when your sales team picks up the phone or they're prospecting via email, and inevitably that prospect quickly goes online and does a Google search, if all things considered equal, if they search your competitor and there is a bunch of activity, CEO being featured, showing momentum, being positioned as thought leaders for your competitor, and when they go online to search about you, the only thing that shows up is your website and your social media, that all of a sudden becomes the equalizer, right? That's the difference maker, where you're going to choose the competitor because they seemingly, right or wrong, have more trust and more credibility in the market.
So is that really just a function of getting, let's say trade journals in my industry and so on to pick up stories that involve, like, as you said, like interview the CEO or something like that? Is it just getting placement? Is it something, because you alluded to positioning and so on. So I'd just like to maybe unpack a little bit, like, what is the PR journey? Like, if somebody were to work with a good PR firm like yours and say, okay, help us, I believe in this prominence thing. What do I have to do to get there?
Yeah, it's interesting because for as long as PR has been around, PR is a pretty legacy marketing function. For as long as it's been around, PR itself still has a perception problem in that most people— Ironic, right? Most people do still believe that PR equals press release, that it is strictly an announcement-driven function. I have an announcement and I tell the press about it and they write about my news. And while that is in part of a PR strategy, really the foundation of any good PR strategy is in, to your point, that storytelling. So regardless of what industry you work in, it may be pretty mundane to the everyday person on the street, but it's always interesting to the people that you sell to, the people that you impact, the industry that you work in. And so figuring out what is your unique story that you have to tell. Is that a story you tell alongside how you've helped your customers? Is that a story about your founder? Do they have an interesting founder story? Is it their leadership philosophy that's kept this fantastic culture throughout the big quit? Is it a thought leadership strategy where maybe your head of marketing or head of product is an expert within the manufacturing vertical and they're able to solve problems for prospects through the media? So there are a number of different ways that you can tell your company's story outside of, here's my news release and I'm going to distribute it to the press. It is figuring out the why and the who cares behind every organization. And trust me, it lives in every organization, whether you think it does or doesn't.
Well, what's interesting about that, because I can easily see a situation where you, as let's say a PR specialist, right? So you're talking to owner, leadership team, whatever, and there may be things they're doing that actually are special, but they don't have visibility to it. They can't see the specialness of it all.
Sure.
They don't know what stands out. So just curious, is that ever hard to pull out of people, like to just figure out like what you actually have a great founder story and the founder thinks, no, I just have a regular story. It's who would want to know about this except for my family? How do you get people to maybe be a little bit outside of their shell? Because I think some of that is people aren't always comfortable being that out there.
Right. Well, I'll use a specific example. The short answer is yes. We start working with clients many times and they'll say, gosh, we have so much great perspective and interesting points of view that live within our leadership team. Anytime we have meetings or kickoffs, it's just robust conversations, but we don't know how to get it out there. Right. But it lives inside. We can't get it out. So an example would be, we have a lot of clients that work within industrial manufacturing. So it is software that is sold to plant managers in manufacturing facilities, for example. And what we do as an agency is be the drivers of that commentary. So bringing that CEO into a conversation where we are essentially interviewing them and asking very specific questions. And what we'll end up with is perspective, where they might be really passionate about the digital transformation of manufacturing, or it could be they might be really passionate about how to get more women into the manufacturing field. And so we start to uncover these areas of passion, this commentary, and then truly it's as simple as we pitch it to the press. Say we have the CEO of X company who has a contrarian or interesting perspective about XYZ. Would you be interested in an interview? Could be on a podcast, could be in a trade mag, could be from a national outlet that it happens to cover that industrial vertical. But we simply pitch the idea and pitch the topic. And from that, we'll get interview requests, or they might say, would the CEO be interested in writing a full written perspective, explaining that point of view so that we can potentially publish that as a guest author. So it's just being genuinely curious and setting aside the time to ask the second and third questions to get that commentary and see who's interested in that.
Well, what's interesting about that, because I could see the need to guide that process, because somebody could, on the plane, they read a book on how to generate your own PR. So I'm making that up. I don't know. I'm sure the book exists.
They do. Form, right? Yeah.
So he says, gosh darn it, we're going to get PR for ourselves this year. But then they get busy. That's what happens. So I see the role of like a PR firm is you have to actually drive that process. But the other side of that is it also will require a fair amount of work on the part of your client or whoever the company is. You can't do it for somebody entirely. Right. Like at some point they actually have to be willing to be interviewed. They have to actually be on that podcast. They have to be willing to be out there. So do you find that and I'm just trying to channel thinking about an owner hearing this this conversation right now and say, boy, I don't know how to do like interviews and I don't want to get caught, looking foolish or anything like that. How much of PR is preparing people for their moment in the spotlight?
My first piece of advice would be speak to what you know. And it's no different than if given the choice to give a presentation in front of 200 people, you're going to pick something that you're passionate about and that So we don't put our clients into situations where they're being interviewed about either a new technology or a trend that they're completely ill-informed and they're going going on the fly. So stick with what you know, first of all. And then secondarily, yes, we absolutely do help prepare our clients. We usually have a pre-call before an interview to go over what is the style of this reporter, what's the goal, what did we hook them on, what was the angle that got them interested. And some spokespeople need more media training than others. But for the most part, if we are teeing them up with a conversation about a topic which they're comfortable, that's a much easier row to sow for them. But you absolutely want to know what you're going into. And certainly we're also not setting up our clients with reporters who historically are looking for a side story or looking for a way to take someone down. We do our homework too to make sure that those are pretty safe conversations.
Right. So you're not going to spring. So what is your answer to the Ukraine and COVID on somebody out of the blue, unless somebody really wants to talk about
when we start every relationship, we do offer media training as a level setting for everyone on how to deflect those questions, how to bridge, how to move away and kind of come back to the original topic. But we do prepare our clients the best that we can. The other thing I would say too is for anyone that is looking to read a book on how to do PR is first understand and ask yourself, why are we doing it? Mm-hmm. What do I expect to get as a result? And who is my audience? I would imagine some of your listeners may have a national audience that they're looking to reach, but others may have a very local audience. Their customers may only be in their local market. And the local market strategy, depending on the market, is going to be different than that national strategy. So understanding why you're doing it in the first place and who the audience is will help shape the type of story that you should tell. Locally, if you're in a war for talent, you want to tell a leadership, talent, culture, growth story and talk about any unique things that you're doing in your organization that are keeping your employee retention high and work that angle. If your goal is to attract talent, if your goal is to attract local investors, you're going to want to have more of this sort of momentum and milestone announcement that talks about new hires and growth or a new headquarters. Maybe it's customer acquisition. So it depends on what your audience is to really formulate the right story. But there is a story to tell for everyone, but ensuring that you understand who you're talking to make sure the right one is told.
So now you've made a distinction before, Lindsey, between what goes on your website, the stuff you can control, like word for word. I mean, you can write great copy, you can hire somebody, you could say exactly the words you want to say. And PR isn't exactly that, because you're putting a story that you may be very meticulous fashioning, but it's going to go through a filter of the reporter, the writer, whatever the venue is that you're trying to get placed in. So you really have to think a little bit three-dimensional chess. Like, this is what we want to say, but this is how we would like them to receive it. Mm-hmm. So that is very different. So if I think for somebody who's only done, like, we've done website SEO and so on, this is a slightly different game. And then you alluded to a word I just want to get to, which is expectations. What are realistic expectations for somebody? A lot of times in the smaller end of the business, let's say a $10 million company, every dollar is measured to have lead generation potential. Sure. So PR could feel like a luxury in the short run, but maybe not so much in the long run. So how would you help somebody think about, is PR right? Is this something we should be investing in?
Yeah. For smaller companies, typically the best route for PR would be a project investment, either with a freelancer or with an agency, because PR in and of itself is a brand spend. So most small companies need to be reserving that budget for more customer acquisition techniques and putting that into demand gen first before layering on a consistent spend into more of that brand building. So for smaller companies, I would suggest doing either trying it yourself or hiring a freelancer or an agency on a project basis to get firepower and air cover around big moments for your company. Larger companies should have that layer of ongoing PR spend as part of their budget. for consistent brand building as their category gets more traction and their competitors start to get more, maybe it's more funding coming in or their competitors going public. PR it's not a nice to have, it's a have to level the playing field. So that's where that spend needs to become more consistent. From an expectation standpoint, again, it goes into that brand bucket. So if what you need is leads, don't put it into PR. Now, PR can drive leads. Absolutely. We have fantastic success stories with that, but that is the exception, not the expectation. But if what you're looking for is better leads that when they reach your sales team have heard of you for some reason, or when your sales team reaches out, there's brand familiarity, or didn't I just see you, or, oh, I just saw your CEO interviewed. It will strengthen the leads that come in from whatever channel is bringing them in. That's where PR can exert a lot of influence. And then depending on what your PR strategy involves, it can affect your SEO. So that's something that you mentioned, is you are gaining high quality links back to your website, which is increasing the strength or authority of the website that you own. And that is a big SEO factor there. And then you're also able to get a lot of your keywords included in articles that you're trying to rank for from an SEO standpoint as well. So there's a lot of outside benefits, but direct ROI, if I'm X dollars in, X dollars out for PR, if that is your expectation, you will be highly disappointed in that investment.
Well, I'm so glad that you're very candid about that, because I think it's so much in life is about setting right expectations. That's how good relationships function. You have to communicate that.
Sure.
And I could see how PR could actually add a glow or put the shine on other activities, including your pay-per-click, your SEO,
Absolutely.
your website, and so on, because just that. But it's hard to measure, because how do you measure when somebody clicks on your ad? The reason they clicked on it is because they've seen something about you in an article they read last month.
Sure.
There's almost no way to draw a direct line to that.
Right.
And so much of marketing now is going into, the whole mantra now is marketing metrics, measure everything. So you have a thriving practice, and, the people, they read too, just like if I'm reading that, they're reading that, right? So, and yet they're investing in PR. So they must see some sort of, maybe not a direct line ROI, but there is an ROI somewhere in some time horizon that makes sense to them, right? Like you said, brand building and so on. So have you found that it's got to be measured, or people at a certain point of, I don't want to use the word sophistication, but they understand the need. Is it still out there that people understand the need for this brand building, and PR in its classic sense there's still an appetite for that?
There is, and we certainly get both. And it really is we find it's the CEO mentality of the organization, whether they understand marketing or don't. If the CEO is all about revenue, there is a bigger spotlight on PR and the ROI and the measurement. If the CEO is very passionate about brand and culture, there is a broader understanding of the importance of having this brand spend rolled into marketing. One of my favorite sayings is that scaling revenue wins quarters and a strong brand wins categories. And it could not be more true. If all things considered equal, if my company is growing as fast as my biggest competitor, then employee size and revenue in customer wins, but our brand is more well-respected, well-liked, well-known, customers have this great experience and they're bought into our culture from top to bottom, that company wins. And you can't put a price on the ROI of that, of the way that you make a prospect or customer feel about your brand. So it is a little bit of both, depending on where the CEO falls in an organization. The cool thing about our business is PR now, since the pandemic, and brand in general is having its moment, because when all the physical world shut down and the events went away, the steak and handshake sales dinners went away, all these companies were left with only their digital experience to rely on. And there was a lot of companies who were like, ugh,
right,
I don't like how this feels. We've really over-indexed on our physical experiences. but we haven't put near enough attention on how do people feel about us when the only way we can experience now, right, is like this.
Right.
And so we saw a big increase in brand spend and in PR spend since for the first quarter of 2020, which you could have never predicted. We're fortunate we happen to work in a industry, which is B2B SaaS, that was highly resilient and thrived during the pandemic. So I don't take that for granted. If we were an agency that was focused on restaurants or retail or travel and tourism, would it be a different story today? But we're seeing still continued increases in brand spend more than we have in the past.
Well, it just makes so much sense, and it's not going away, right? I mean,
Right.
The reality is, the people have gotten used to this. My practice used to be very regional in like the Philadelphia area. Now it's become much more national and almost exclusively delivered virtually.
Sure.
Even, pure consulting and strategy development. Why not? And people are very comfortable with it because they got acclimated. They had no choice. The last 2 years, everybody got used to it. And I also think about like used car dealers. Every one of them thought they became a genius in the last year, right? Because there were some macro factors that just benefited that industry.
Right.
But when you talked about not just winning quarters, but winning categories, that's the difference maker. So yeah, so right now they may think, well, we're all geniuses, but eventually the water does recede and things get tough again in every market. I don't care what industry it is. There's always those, peaks and valleys. When you're the recognized leader, when you're when you have that stronger brand, there's no doubt that's going to make you that much more. And I use the word resilient, which is one of my favorite words. That definitely made you revenue resilient in that context.
Yep.
So that's I think a really great thought there. And again, kudos to your firm. I mentioned this in our pre-discussion, just how you focused on a very specific niche, and you did that before, so it was fortuitous that's how it worked out the last 2 years, but you knew who you served. And we tell that to our clients all the time, really try to niche down as much as you can, because you'll pick up the ancillary business anyway.
Yeah,
but you have to stand for something.
We do. And the toughest part is like a two-part, you can say it, that we're focused on this particular industry, but then staying disciplined in that industry. So we know exactly who makes a good client for BLASTmedia. We know exactly what that looks like. And we don't take on what we ultimately know will be bad revenue. Even when the pandemic hit and we had a ton of clients knee-jerk cancel, we never took in bad revenue. Even if it was okay revenue at the time, and we had, clients that had nothing to do with B2B SaaS wanting to work with us, we said no, because ultimately that turns into a situation where we are not staying true to who we service, and we're ultimately gonna have to say no to those people eventually, right, and get rid of them. So it's staying really disciplined also, so that everyone in your organization is a subject matter expert. So we have every single person in our agency from top to bottom working with B2B SaaS companies. So we have this built-in layer of expertise that if we just say that we are, but then we're working on beauty products and CPG brands and motor oil, then it's like, oh, there might really only be 5 of 65 of us who understand this particular market.
No, that's great. Really appreciate it. And Lindsey, thank you so much for sharing some really great, I think, useful insights for our listeners here. If somebody listening felt they were in your category, and you've kind of told us who it is, and wanted to get a hold of you, what's the best way to find out more about you, to make contact, and so on?
Yes, feel free to reach out to me directly, which is lindsey@blastmedia.com. Our website is blastmedia.com, or you sure can find me on LinkedIn. So really appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation. Thank you for teeing it up.
No, our pleasure. Absolutely. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
Hey, thanks for listening to another episode of the Revenue Throughput Podcast. If you like this episode, and if you like the series, make sure you subscribe below. And also, if you liked it, please do review it. When people are looking for something exciting to listen to, especially the kind of content we're bringing, which is practical insights for B2B companies, this is a place and a free resource that they can take advantage of. Let them know about it with your review. So subscribe, review, enjoy. Thanks again.